All right, so I'll take that as a yes. Let me just get this slideshow going here. And it looks still a few more people coming onto the call here. So hopefully they won't miss too much at the beginning. All right, so if you're able to see the screen, and we'd like to get a couple confirmation messages just before we get started. People can type in. Okay, I'm not seeing any messages. Brian, do you have any, can you just give me a confirmation that we're good to go here? Okay, good. All right, great. Well, thank you, Fletch, for the introduction. I'm very excited to share this information. This is very powerful information, and the intention is to empower everyone on the call with a greater understanding of how to use social media for business. And just as a note, we do have two special offers that we will discuss at the end, just before the question and answer period, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. So make sure you stay on all the way through to the end. And we will have a question answer. If we don't answer your question during the webinar, feel free to stick around for the end and just submit your questions in the question pane in the control panel. Now there's three basic steps or three basic components to any online campaign. This may seem very simple, but I like to keep it simple. The first step is that you got to get found. If they're not finding you, then obviously you won't be able to do anything. The second step is to convert those visitors into clients or customers. And then the third step is to measure to improve results and establish that return on investment. Everything that you've put into that campaign you should get back. As long as you have those first two steps and you can measure, you should be able to do that. So these are the three basic steps, basic to every online campaign. I know that there's a common idea that if you build it, they will come, but they're only going to come if you can make it findable, because there's so much content out there. And just because they do find you doesn't mean they're going to convert from a visitor into a sale. And another common conception is that it's hard to measure online campaigns, which just isn't true. It can be measured because it's online. So make sure you have a way to measure whatever it is that you're doing online. Now today, we're not going to cover all three things. We're going to cover one specifically, which is getting found. This is the first step, obviously. You can't sell to a potential client or customer if you aren't in the same room. And just as a preview of what we're going to cover, so you know what's coming up, we're going to go over some basic terms and definitions. We're going to cover why an online presence is important. We're going to prioritize online marketing for you. We're going to go over what social media is, why online social networks are important. That isn't always very clear. Which social networks you should be on, the best ones. And then a few action steps for success, and we'll get into that extra Q&A period. Again, for anyone that's just gotten onto the call, if you have any questions, we're going to try to answer a few during the webinar. If we don't, there'll be some Q&A period at the end. Just go ahead and enter your questions in the control panel that says that asks for the questions. Hold on a sec. Get the right slide up here. Okay, so now when it comes to referrals, I just want to make a point here. Some good news for anyone that lives off referrals already. If you deliver great service and people recommend you, you're probably going to be successful in using social media. Nothing has really changed in that department. Referral marketing is still an excellent method of obtaining new business. If you have a face-to-face business, that's the best way to close business usually. It's just that today, with today's tools, you can now do it faster, better, and more efficient. You don't necessarily want to hide behind your computer and your jammies all the time. You should still meet people face-to-face whenever possible. We're going to cover a little more on that later, but it's still really important for you to do face-to-face activity when you can.
Well, Trevor, there's a question just came in, and I think it's a good one. It says, how do I get referrals just in the area I live in?
Okay, well, that is a great question. Generally, there's two ways. Referrals from your warm market, maybe through Facebook or other similar sites, or just, word of mouth like you normally would. Or you make sure that you use content online that has location-based keywords. And we're going to cover keywords a little bit more if you don't understand how that works, but generally speaking, if you are in a particular area and you have a service that's based on location, then new prospects are going to search for that, and they're probably going to put their city in the search request. So they'll use location-based keywords just as a matter of course in their search request. And you want to make sure you show up there, which we'll cover a little bit more too. But those are the two basic ways to get referrals in the area that you live in. All right, so moving on. The words. This is an often overlooked aspect of understanding this area. It's understanding the words equals understanding the subject, and it's really important. I find that I have to clear up very commonly used words, so we're going to do some of that in this webinar. And the reason I place so much emphasis on it is that it actually, if you have words you don't understand, it makes it harder to take action. And you want to be aware of words that maybe everyone's using, but no one can really define. There is a lot of made-up lingo, just part and parcel of this new frontier here of the online world. So if you feel that you can't take action, really in any subject, not just this one, there's probably some basic undefined words, and I would challenge you to locate those and get them cleared up. But luckily for everyone on the call, we're going to cover some of those right now. First one is traditional media. This is a media that probably everyone on the call is going to be pretty familiar with. TV, magazines, radio, newspapers, postcards, all that kind of the usual marketing methods that we've been used to for so many years. Now, there's nothing good or bad particularly that I'm stating here about traditional media. I'm just pointing out what it is. It does tend to be more expensive than social media, but it's also great for reaching a lot of people. So if you're starting out new, traditional media is probably something to consider, either a TV spot or radio or postcards or something like that, to create that initial awareness for what you're doing. The main difference between this and the next word we're going to clear up, which is social media, is that traditional media is a one-way flow. It's not a conversation. It is just one direction. You can't really have a conversation with a magazine or a newspaper. Although actually that's not totally true. You can do that now online because a lot of these traditional methods, the traditional media, are creating hybrids of themselves online. So you can actually write comments and things like that. But that's delving into the social media, which is the next word, as I mentioned. So the social media is basically anything conversational. Social networks, blogs, forums, chat rooms. These all have two-way conversational aspects to them, and some people carry on whole conversations for quite a bit on Twitter or Facebook, and that's just the basic, the great things about social media is that it's inexpensive, from free to very inexpensive. It can help make traditional media more effective, which I'll cover more on that in a minute. And then those are the two basic things. It's just a conversational approach. That's how you can tell the difference. Now, here's another word that people use a lot, which is internet. So I just thought I'd clear this up because a lot of people have it mixed up with another word. Basically, it's made up of a couple parts. Inter means between, and net is a collection of computers and devices in this particular case. So the Internet is simply a global system of interconnected computer networks. And this is actually created, it existed for quite a while before the public had access to it. And it's actually a tool that was developed during the Cold War to enable unstoppable communications in case of war, sort of a multi-channel approach. A message could get from one side of the U.S. to the other, and you wouldn't be able to stop it by just cutting one phone line or something like that. But the basic idea here is that the Internet is the hardware part of our online experience. It's the computers and the servers that make up this whole network that we use so often now. In comparison, when you talk about the web, which is short for World Wide Web, the official name, also known as www or W3, and just commonly known as web, is a system of interlinked documents accessed via the Internet. You could think of any web page as a document, or a resource is another name for it. And actually only about 30% of the information on the Internet is available on the web. Now, Internet and web have become interchangeable over time, so conversationally they pretty much mean the same thing. But here's my analogy for this. If you think of the Internet as the floor that supports the people who stand on the floor, the people who stand on the floor and talk to each other would be the documents. So you have the hardware side, which is the Internet, and you have the sort of the software, I guess you could say, or the documents, the communicating parts, which are the web. So when you're actually on a web page and there's a link there and you click that and it brings you to another page, that's part of the web, but it's not the same as the Internet. All right, so Google, this is probably one of my favorite words to clear up because everyone uses the word Google. It's actually a typo. The original word was Google, and that simply means number 1 followed by 100 zeros, which is, you can see the number of zeros that is at the bottom of the page of the slide there. Now the first picture there is the mathematician. His name is Edward Kasner, who was trying to figure out a name for this very large number. They actually, I'm assuming it's because he wanted to give it a name because there wasn't one, but they did have one for the number 1 followed by 80 zeros, which is the number of elementary particles in the universe. I don't know how long it took them to count that up, but they didn't have a name for this number. So he set about figuring out this name, and he asked a very reliable source, which was his 8-year-old nephew, Milton. And Milton replied that a number that large should be named something silly, so he called it Google. Now, years later, that was back in 1950 or something, so years later, the founders of Google were going to use this word as their domain name. They misspelled it as Google, and the name was available, so they took it. And it essentially represents an infinite number, which is pretty much what you get when you do searches on Google. So that's where that comes from, and that's the simplicity of that word. Now the next word is blog. This is used a lot as well, and essentially comes from the word web, and you add the word blog to it. Now it used to be that people would say weblog or I'm weblogging, things like that. It's a little difficult to say compared to blog. Where it basically comes from is you take off the WE from web and you add B to log, and a log is just a journal or a book, like a diary. It was originally made out of wood, so that's why it's called log. And it's essentially just a self-publishing platform that anyone can use. And the reason that picture of the ship is there is because the the logbook that the word log comes from was used to track a ship's speed. So that's all that that is. It's just a self-publishing platform. Now we're going to go over something here called the purchase funnel, and this is where we get into the meat and potatoes, what we're really here to discuss. This is not the sales funnel, if you've ever heard of that. This concept was borrowed from Dave Evans, who wrote the book Social Media Marketing, An Hour a Day. And this is going to show you how social media actually affects traditional media and how that affects purchasing. It all starts with traditional media generally, which we already went over, the TV, newspaper, magazines, radio, postcards. And that basically is directed to a large number of people. And the whole purpose of this is normally to get as many people into the purchase funnel as possible. For the purpose of this webinar, we're going to go over a very simplistic view of it. The purchase funnel is made up of 3 parts: awareness, consideration, and purchase. Now Mr. Brown here, is shown by number 1, becomes aware of a particular product through traditional media, goes through the consideration phase. Traditional media will only carry him as far as awareness. It won't necessarily deal with his consideration of whether to buy or not. And he decides to buy or not, and he makes the purchase. But traditional media really only goes as far as awareness. There is actually an additional part to this purchase funnel which came about after the internet became popular. But before that, you couldn't really see it. It was always there, but you couldn't see it, which was the post-purchase experience, which is represented by that circle. Now, you always had an experience after you purchased something, but you couldn't always necessarily get that across to someone more than just your friends and a few people that you're connected with already. But that experience is always there. But now, because of the internet, which is represented by that cloud, people can blog about it. They can say, you know, for example, the product maybe wasn't what they said it was, but it did what I needed. So that is now recorded forever online, and it can dramatically affect what actually happens to your purchase funnel for your company. Now let's go through a second example and just show how that works. So Mr. Green here, represented by number 2, is made aware of the same product, the same traditional media. He goes through awareness, but he pauses in consideration and decides to, because he can, he's going to go to Google and he's going to check out what people have said. He's going to look for reviews. You've probably done this yourself. We've all been through this purchase funnel many times. So just for the sake of example, he goes to the blog. There's lots of other places that you can go to get this information, these reviews and so on. But he ends up on this blog and checks, you know, he's going to find what this person said about it. And that's either going to be beneficial or not. Now the interesting thing here is that traditional media only has about a 14% trust factor. If you think about your own experience, that may seem pretty realistic to you. I know it does to me. However, a peer recommendation, someone just like me that's not connected to that company, since the traditional media is pushed out by the companies themselves are promoting, the social media end of it has a 90% trust factor. So what we're really looking at here is a very large validation process that people go through. And that's why it's important to have that online presence. So let's just recap here. The 3 reasons an online presence is vital. You've got the fact that people will like to meet you on the internet before they actually contact you live. If you're not online, then they're not going to find you, that's for certain. And your past customers and clients can help provide online validation to new customers that you are the right choice. Now that's not true if they don't say nice things about you online. It's going to be a little bit difficult. It's going to go in the other direction. So for the companies that the smaller and more nimble companies that provide great service, excellent products, you actually have an edge here because it's more likely that people will validate what you're doing to your new potential customers that are looking you up online, however they found you online. And here's another edge that social media has over traditional media. The social media and the online content stays around forever. It's a cumulative marketing approach. So that can be very powerful. Over time, you're just adding more and more content, and it can just stick around forever. Let's talk about prioritizing online marketing. For starters, because there's so much content, there's actually about 3 billion or more pages being added daily to the World Wide Web. So you need to focus, especially if you're new to this effort, you want to focus on your competitive niche. You can devote about 25% of your marketing effort to the inbound marketing approach out of your whole marketing mix, which is where they find you online. Inbound marketing is just creating an environment where people can find you online at the time that they're actually looking for an answer to a problem, as opposed to the traditional media approach, which is more interruptive usually. They're not necessarily looking for you when you cold call them or give them a postcard. I mentioned content here several times. That's in relation to blogging. Content is a huge priority for any online campaign. You must create content on a regular basis. And then online social networking allows you to be a brand yourself. If you're delivering a personal service, you really are the brand. You can leverage referral marketing. The visibility is faster online if you show up sooner. I'll go over why that is in a few minutes. And you can actually use online social networks as your own personal Associated Press for content distribution.
Trevor, let's see. We just got one more question come in. What if my client base or my demographic isn't using social media?
Oh, yeah, that's a question that I hear quite often. The simple answer is it doesn't actually matter if your clients personally use Facebook or any other particular social network. And the reason for that is it doesn't have to do with demographics. It has to do with the fact that there's two things that people are good at regardless of age for the most part. One of them is email and the other is Google. So in answer to this question, when people search online, they will have a better chance of finding you if you're on a number of social networks, whether it's Facebook or other ones. You're just going to show up more often because these networks are so large. So it doesn't really matter which ones you show up on as long as you show up in search. That's the main priority, is you want to show up in search, and these social networks are a really efficient way to do that. All right, so we're talking about prioritizing online marketing. So one of the most important things to know about this area, which a lot of people don't really understand, so we're going to clear this up right now, is what keywords are, how keywords hide your site or help it get found, how blogs are your best long-term strategy, keywords you need for your online campaign, and how to create good, unique content that generates a response. We won't necessarily be able to cover all those things right here, but we're going to cover keywords. It's a really important concept to understand. I know most people have heard of keywords, but they don't necessarily understand them. So I've put together a really simple analogy here. I call it Keywords 101. You have your prospect, which is your groom. Think of him as your groom. The bride would be your website. Now, back in the day, when a groom wanted to find a bride, he would employ a matchmaker. He could give the matchmaker tell the matchmaker what he was looking for. That's actually the millionaire matchmaker. It's an actual person. She's a real matchmaker. The groom gives the matchmaker the qualities that he's looking for, and then she would find the appropriate bride. So it's not really any different. In this case, Google's the matchmaker. The prospect is the one with the listed qualities, which are the keywords, and he gives them to Google, and Google serves up 10 to 15 different websites saying this is apparently what you're looking for. Now, in order for this to happen properly, there's certain places that you need to place keywords, but only a few, and you need to know what those are. Let's go over blogs versus websites. Blogs have a distinct advantage over websites. You can use hundreds of keywords. You can have unlimited updates that you add to a blog, whereas it's a little harder to do that on a website. On a website, you're going to have maybe 20, 30 keywords that you're focusing on most of the time for your average website. So that's a little bit hard if you want to show up for a lot of keywords. And you're not probably going to change the contact us page every day or your product offering every day. So you're a little limited sometimes in how many pages you can add to your website. So it also takes longer for your website to show up on search, especially if it's new. Whereas a blog can actually improve visibility for your website pretty quickly. Ideally, your blog would be part of your website, so you tie the two together. And it's important to understand that a huge factor in visibility is the number of web pages on your site that Google has in their library, in their index. Normally, if you're going to add or modify to your website, that requires a professional, a webmaster, and some money. But on a blog, that's not a requirement. You can add to a blog whenever you want, as often as you want, and it doesn't cost you anything but your time. Every blog article, this is important, of say at least 150 to 250 words is indexed as a web page. There's two things that are priorities on a campaign, an online campaign: the number of web pages that you have and the number of other sites that link to you. And you can increase both of those with a blog. It's not listed here, but those are two really important things that you can accomplish with a blog. That's how the visibility is improved for your website: the number of pages and the number of sites that link to you. And the more often that you update your blog or your website, the more often that people will come back, or Google will come back and update its index of your site, which is an important factor as well. So here's a basic strategy that's sure to work. If you create a blog and make it your content home base, and then distribute your blog content updates through social networks, which can be done automatically, and then update it at least once a week minimum. If you're already using email newsletters, you can repurpose your newsletter content into blog articles. And most blogs already have that distribution capability built into them. I do say 1 times per week minimum is the minimum to update. Multiple times daily is the best. If you can update several times a day, there are ways to do that without driving yourself crazy. That would be the best way. Now remember, I mentioned that 2 to 3 billion pages of data are added to the internet daily. So you need to create content and focus on your niche first to show up for that. One point that's important to understand too, when it comes to social networks, it pretty much follows the rules of maybe a birthday party or a golf game. It's social. You can meet friends of friends, build new relationships. These networks have a built-in sharing capability, so it's easy to share you with other people. And by being there, you can attract clients who ask for your expertise. But because it's social, you don't want to start with selling. You don't want to just advertise only or start with that, because you wouldn't do that at a golf game, and you wouldn't do it at a party. You don't just first start handing out business cards. you build a relationship leveraging the existing relationship that you have of a friend, which people do all the time in the real world. You can do the same thing, just take the same approach on social networks. And you want to be approachable. You want to be a person, not just a corporate presence. So about 75% of the time, you want to share who you are, and about 25% of the time, share your work-related content. It's okay to share what you do for work or what you're currently doing, your current project, but you don't want to just talk about that all the time.
Well, Trevor, you may have already, a question just came in about that. It's like you may have already covered this, but how do you use social media in a professional way for business?
Well, in all cases, generally speaking, the best way to use social media professionally is to just represent yourself. By all means, establish a professional presence on LinkedIn and other networks, but even then, people really like to connect to people. Just as you wouldn't wear a suit while you're on the golf course, you don't really do that in social media either. You could be considered more professional that way, I suppose, if you did wear a suit on the golf course, but it would come across as a little odd. So to avoid that being odd part, you just want to just be yourself, talk about the things that you like. You can talk about your hobbies or what you're currently doing. You don't want to overshare, but just represent yourself in a genuine way, and that will attract people who resonate with that, and they'll just reach out to you. All right, so on this next slide, social networks equal online visibility. I've mentioned this a couple times, but this is just a graphic representation of how this works. So if you locate your website on this slide, you can't. It's too small. And that's pretty much how it appears on Google, especially if you're just getting started, or if you never were very active online. Facebook, however, and these other social networks are enormous. By carving out a little bit of real estate on Facebook or another social network, you're riding the coattails of this very often updated network, and Google's constantly in their indexing, and your material with your keywords can show up sooner, much sooner, if you're leveraging something like Facebook. So again, it doesn't really matter which network you're on. You should at least list yourself on a number of networks. I'm probably on about 20 different social networks myself, and I dominate about 8 pages into a Google search for my name. So for referrals, if someone mentions my name, I'm very findable. You want to do the same thing by carving out some real estate on these larger networks. Another question that I get a lot is which social networks are the right ones to use for business? But really the best question, or a better way to say that, is which social network makes me more visible to an online prospect who is searching right now? Again, it really doesn't matter which network which network you use. You just want to be on a number of them. I hope I've beaten that into the ground enough that everyone just is on as many social networks as they can, because that's what you need to do. That said, make sure you're on these. Google Places, great for business. Yelp shows up very quickly. A Facebook page, also known as a business page or a fan page. It's been through a number of changes. Just as an aside, the Facebook page is completely indexed by Google. Your personal Facebook page is not. So for any business that's contemplating or has actually created a Facebook page but on a personal profile, you got personal and you got pages. If you're representing your business on Facebook and it talks about friends, you're in the wrong place. You want to be on a page where it talks about liking. You should have a like button on there. Very important, because Google won't index that personal profile. But you should also have a Facebook profile because it will index your name. So as I've already mentioned several times, you want to be on that social network as a person. LinkedIn, one of the larger networks, same with Twitter, and YouTube is owned by Google. I think that probably helps more than it hurts, so important to be on there as well. Now, it probably sounds like a lot. I said I'm on 20 networks. Seems like a tremendous amount of work to be on all these networks, but I'm not on them all the time. You don't have to be constantly using them. Pick one that you like to use and use that mostly. And if there's an automatic update from your blog, you can update the other ones that way. But for the most part, you can just list yourself on a number of different networks. And this also helps you, being on these social networks helps you tell your own story rather than leave it up to your competitors or maybe have no story at all. Competition. This is here because it's really important to know how your website ranks against your online competition. There's two different kinds of competition. There's your actual competition, the maybe brick and mortar stores that do exactly what you do, or other people that have the same consulting service or provide the same video services or whatever it might be. And then there's the online competition. Who shows up for a particular keyword that's important for that represents what you do? There's going to be 10 or 15 people that show up on 10 or 15 companies rather, that show up on the first page of a Google search for any particular search term. If that's your search term, if that's your best one, then they are your competition online. So you need to know what you're up against so that you can show up on the first page for those particular keywords. Now, in order to do that, you just need to know the weakness of your competition and make that your strength. If there's some way that you can do that, you should do it. Find out the weakness of your competition and make that your strength. I can tell you, though, having done a number of analyses for this particular factor, what the competition is doing for a client, generally most companies are weak in their use of keywords and leveraging blogs, and that's why I've gone over that in detail on this webinar. If you can become good at keywords and using blogs, you can probably beat your competition and get on the first page of Google over time. It won't happen overnight, but those are keywords, and leveraging blogs are two very important aspects to an online campaign, and many companies are weak in them. So we're getting near the end here of the webinar, and I have an action step for, there's actually two. One of them is really a gift. We're going to be sending out a link later today for a free download. It's called Qualified Leads for Less, and it details a high ranking for search and a high conversion search engine strategy that's centered on blogging. It's an article I wrote that covers like an enterprise type blogging strategy that you can use. But even if you don't use it, it's good to understand the information because it would potentially give you an edge. So anyone who's serious about showing up online needs to at least be aware of this strategy. Literally millions of dollars have gone into researching, developing, and perfecting this particular strategy, which I've detailed in this download, which we'll send to you later today. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. It actually gives small and medium-sized businesses a level playing field when it comes to blogging. So if you feel that you can't compete with the big dogs, you can. It is possible with some of these tools. And it helps you maximize the content you create for the best search engine optimization possible. And optimization just means that people can find you better. Now, in that download, when you access that download, you're going to also get access to a promo code for $150 off our signature competition analysis. I just went over why it's important to know what your competition is doing, and that's why we provide this service. Now, this is a special gift for everyone that's on this webinar. It's normally $500. We're taking $150 off, and you'll get the promo code once you get the download. It includes 1 hour personal training session with myself to review the competition analysis in detail and I will provide written recommendations on your next best step. Regardless of anything else, you'll know what you can do next to improve your visibility. Now, this is a limited offer. I can't do that many of these personal training sessions in a month. I can only do about 5. So if you are interested and you'd like to get scheduled, you can call the office. The number will be on the screen in a minute. Call the office right away and leave your name and number so that we can contact you back as a priority, because that link won't go out immediately. It'll go out sometime today. So those who call in and schedule right now will get the analysis, the training session with me, and also written recommendations to help you take your next step. So just call and let us know. There's no obligation beyond receiving the analysis. So we're going to be in the question and answer period now. So just type in your questions, and then Fletch will let me know what those are, and the contact information is right here on the screen, so just feel free to call in.
Okay, Trevor, let's see, we've got one here. You mentioned a book at the very beginning where you borrowed the purchase funnel from a book. Could you give that in more detail and what it's called? It's about social media.
Yes, it's Dave Evans is the name of the author. It's called Social Media Marketing, An Hour a Day. It's a pretty hefty book. It goes into quite some detail. I don't know if there's an updated version. When I read it, there was of course, was immediately out of date as soon as it got printed. So this is in 2008. So a lot of what the specific examples he gives in the book, those social networks may not even be available anymore. But a lot of the content is very good. And so Social Media Marketing, An Hour a Day by Dave Evans, E-V-A-N-S.
Okay, here's another one. People in business are generally just oriented to, can you provide me what I want? What's your price? When can you get it here? Or, if it's a service, that type of thing. And so they're not used to, in the business conversation, being that conversational. It's almost frowned upon to be conversational. They just want the facts, It's like the old Dragnet show, just the facts, man. So do you have any suggestions of how somebody can ease over into being more conversational with social media and avoid bringing up the fact that, they can do a service for a certain amount of money and asking for a job, in other words?
Sure, there's a way to ease into this on something like Facebook or these other tools, Twitter and so on, which is to actually borrow content that other people have written and just simply post it on Facebook, and do that for a while. If this is a new activity, the first thing you want to do is listen. You want to go online and you want to listen, do some searches for your particular area of expertise, find out what people are talking about online about that thing, and you can simply start posting what you find interesting, related to your own interests and what you find useful, and simply make the information known on your social networks. This is all about sharing. It's a give first, take later approach. If people find that you're generous with your information, even if it is someone else's, if you help find useful bits of info and promote it to your friends, they will start to refer you eventually as that in that area of expertise. And even if you've been around for a while, you just were never on social networks, just by getting onto Facebook and connecting with people you already know, you will start to be shared automatically for the most part. Of course, it does depend on how many contacts you actually have. If you only know 2 people that are on Facebook, that might be a while before you start getting shared. But you can simply share other people's content for starters, and then get used to the conversations and how they flow online, and then just start engaging where you can.
Okay, here's another one. How much time do you have for questions, by the way? We're getting a ton of them.
Let's see, it's
another 10 minutes?
Yeah, we could do
okay.
A few more questions here.
Is there, if you want to find what people are blogging about, is there a way to search a topic but just search for blogs only, so you don't, in other words, when you do a Google search and you type in tires, you'll come up with 8 zillion sites about tires. But is there a way just to narrow it down to find out what the conversation is by saying tires, comma, blogs? Or how do you find blogs and what people are talking about?
There's a specific tool for that called Blog Search. If you simply search for Blog Search, you'll find it. It's provided by Google, and that will search just blogs. There are a number of tools that are available. That's probably a very simple one to use that will be pretty user-friendly for most people. Beyond that, there's some more advanced tools. I usually cover those in my competition analysis. We usually end up going over them because they're pretty important. But there are tools that are available that actually accomplish all 3 of the basic steps, including specifically finding blog conversations online. So there's a software that helps you get found, helps you convert visitors into sales, and then also measures that entire process. And one facet of that is that it will find blog conversations. So if it's too much to go into right now what that is specifically, how all that works, but you can certainly, anyone that's interested can email me or call the office number, and I can go into more detail on that. But there's a wide range of services from free and very simple to very advanced.
Okay, here's another one. Since a company on LinkedIn or Facebook cannot build their contacts without having a personal profile, how do I maintain the LinkedIn network my employee builds up as a rep of my business, or can I?
Say the question again.
Well, I think it's focusing on, it says, since a company on LinkedIn or Facebook cannot build their contacts without having a personal profile, how do I maintain the LinkedIn network my employee builds up as my rep for my business, or can I? Does he sort of, so in other words, I guess the person who's in his company doing this LinkedIn network for his company, do they kind of, I think I'm getting this right, can he somehow maintain that LinkedIn network the employee built up?
I see. Your best option, really, because it is a social network, it is based on a relationship with a person. The best option is to find, maybe create one for the owner of the company, since that's probably not going to change too often, and establish that presence, even if it has to be through a proxy. If someone else in the company is managing it, that's one way to do it. Another way that might be helpful is to simply have a newsletter that people that are interested in your content can sign up for specifically. And even though that newsletter isn't on LinkedIn, you should be maintaining a list of emails anyway of people that are interested. Emails are very important. It's practically the currency of the web when it comes to online marketing. And remember, LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and all these free social tools, you're not even renting. They could delete your content and your account at any time for practically any reason. And since you're not paying for it, there's not really much you can do about it. So you need some other platform that you can work from, which again is a good reason to have a blog. LinkedIn is powerful. It's an important tool, but you want to make sure that you have another presence somewhere else that can't be deleted for whatever reason.
Okay. Here's one. Can you describe what is sort of the specifics of a competition analysis? Is it 5 pages long, 6 pages? What does it cover?
What we do is we get from you a keyword that you feel is an important keyword for you to rank for, to show up for on the first page of a Google search. We take about 10 of those companies that show up and we compare them against their inbound marketing effectiveness against yours. There's about 50 different metrics that get analyzed, and it gets prepared into a very simple presentation, like an Excel spreadsheet almost, of certain aspects. And we're able to tell from that what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are when it comes to inbound marketing. as well as yours and make the comparison. And then I go over that in detail to clear up everything that relates to that competition, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, so that you can understand it. You can see clearly what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, what yours are, and then give you suggestions and recommendations on exactly what you can do, whether you do that with the company or on your own, what you can do to move your online marketing campaign forward, ranging from, if you're just starting out or if you've been around for a while, it doesn't really matter. I'll give you some recommendations that you can implement right away.
So if a person was trying to get their boss to approve a budget for them to really do their social marketing better, this would be a key document for them to present when he could actually show the boss, hey, here's what our competition's doing, see how high they rank compared to us in these metrics, and it's a very business-like approach to a business problem.
Exactly. It's going to show you what you're up against and give you like an estimation of the effort required to start coming out on top. And either way you cut it, it's usually a 4 to 6 month approach. But sometimes, if your competition is just killing it in a particular area of inbound marketing, for example, if they're very strong on blogging, it may take longer. But you need to know what you're up against, or you can't really plan effectively. What if you devise a strategy that's too weak? It may be a couple of years before you show up on the first page of Google. You just need to know what you're up against so you can take action.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just shooting in the dark and hoping something gets traction out there. But this is at least a scientific way with proven metrics that they can actually measure, and you can do these 3 months, 6 months out, right, to show have they moved up, or is their competition changed something, or this can be an ongoing analysis, right?
Yeah, it should be checked. Ideally, they'd have the tools to measure, like I was mentioning with this advanced software. You should be able to measure it at any time, but at least check in once a month or every few months to see how it's going, if nothing else. There's different parts you can measure. If you're going to measure everything you need to measure, there's probably about 6 to 8 different pieces of software you could use that are free or very inexpensive, or so you can just use this one tool and measure everything in one platform.
Okay, and you'll tell them all those things when they contact you. I feel like we have to wrap up here because people are needing to get back to work. Somebody out at least on the Pacific Coast probably needs about 5 minutes to call in if they need to. So I'd like to thank Trevor for his great webinar. I think it's bring simplicity to a very complex area and give you things you can actually apply and see yourself start moving up the rankings. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Please call us if you have any further questions or you'd like to pursue the offers that Trevor mentioned. We're at 818-841-9660. Of course, you can always reach Trevor at theassociation.tv. So that's Trevor at theassociation.tv. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.